Good evening and welcome to the March 21st, 2023 meeting of the ARPA Committee. We have a quorum of members, so we will be having an official meeting. And we might as well move forward with our preliminary guest here first, Ms. Nancy Hill. That's probably partially true, but I think you have your share. So, I want to talk about the pavilion, Council on Aging.
Sure, I mean, we would love to have a covered pavilion on the property for Council on Aging use, but also for use by the community. As I think I mentioned before, we found during the pandemic that our outside space was invaluable in offering programming. We were actually the first senior center in the area that was able to bring back some programming because of our outdoor space. So at that time we were having very small programs because everyone of course had to be socially distanced. So we were able to use our driveway because we were only having one program at a time. So we would put people in the driveway. That unfortunately now we can't do that, we're busy, so the driveway's always in use. So a pavilion would just really give us another space to hold programming of all sorts.
Do you have any examples of what you're thinking of doing out there?
Exercise classes of any kind. During the pandemic we had an outdoor concert. We would love to do that.
Lunch?
Lunch. Gosh, you name it. I mean, it would just really become another usable room for us, so we could increase our programming.
That kind of sums that up, increased programming. Anybody else have questions?
I think we talked about cost and what you, because I think what you started with isn't where you are at now. I think, I'm not sure, because
We don't have any defined cost. The cost that I arrived at came from a pro bono architect that I've done some work with. He Googled the site, I told him what we were looking for, and he threw a number on it for me. Because to go out and get that number and get structural documents and all that, there's a cost to that, which we don't have the funds for.
I think, I kind of was hung up when you first came to us with the amount of money it would cost to get schematics or whatever. And I just did a little research on my own, and there's like stock 60 by 40 pavilions available online, which, I don't think you need to get into a serious investment for a schematic for something so basic. It's basically a shed with a foundation or you're not talking about siding, you're not talking about seating, you're not talking about anything other than uprights and roof, correct?
And a foundation to support it all.
Right, of course. I mean, and even that, I think the number you threw out first was somewhere in the $20,000 range for a schematic. Was that what it was?
Based on what I've done with, to get feasibility studies and whatnot, yes, roughly 15, 20,000.
Okay, I just thought that, for something so basic, because there are a number of places you can just reference online, which will give you a quote. And then you have to, obviously, you have to add in your foundation, site work, whatever. But they're substantially less than the $625,000 I think that we started with.
This whole project would have to go out to public bid as well. Would have to follow the state procurement.
Of course.
Which does add a cost.
And electrical.
And the electrical to get that
And
out
some
there.
form of storage.
Mm.
Not bathrooms of any kind.
And furniture, right?
I'm sorry.
And outdoor furniture. Or seating of some
Right.
type.
Seating
right,
of some kind,
right.
yes.
So that's how I arrived at that figure.
Okay, it just seemed high to someone who's, I guess I haven't dealt with, I guess, governmental quotes and things like that. I'm, basically private industry. If I needed something, I get a couple of prices and I do it. So it's a different world.
Totally different, unfortunately.
Anybody else have a question, comment?
So you're still comfortable with the 625 that you originally
Yes,
requested?
and if we can't fall within that budget, we can downsize the pavilion.
What would be the impact of that as far as usability and things like that?
I mean, we will use whatever size we get, obviously. I don't know if a smaller size would be conducive to, for instance, rentals, things along those lines.
So in your vision of these classes and things that go on, just to kind of put a people scope in that, how many people were you thinking of maxing out? What would be like your max amount of people to fit in the 60/40? Doing whatever it is.
I think that would depend on what the program is, and if
Right.
you have tables set up, it's gonna eat up a lot of square footage, but if you have rows of chairs, probably 60, 75 people.
I would guess so, and we often fill our inside room, our large function room. The maximum we can fit in there is 80 people seated for an event, like a dining event.
Yep.
We often have wait lists, so we could easily use a larger space.
Just for frame of reference, I think a lot of us are familiar with the pavilion at the commercial club.
Right.
This is a similar structure. So if you think about the different that space utilized, essentially provide the same opportunities.
And we have often in years past used the commercial club pavilion because we don't have our own.
Right.
So, but that is logistically difficult.
Oh, that's understandable, because you gotta move, there's always gonna be something you have to bring from your house
Right.
to their house.
Yes.
Part of that cost also includes ADA access to get to the pavilion.
That's a great point.
Have you decided where it's gonna be sited?
There's a few areas in mind. That's very wet parcel of land.
I'm familiar with the land.
Probably to the right side of the community garden, in that area.
By the labyrinth there, in that area?
I think
Oh,
it-
on that side, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Nancy, how would that impact the garden, the dog walkers or anything? Would that be like restrictive to the walkers who are there on a regular basis, or?
I wouldn't think so. I mean, I
Yeah.
think the dog walkers would welcome it. I think the community gardening group would
You
welcome it.
could put up a little farm stand there?
Well,
Absolutely.
you could have your outdoor programming there,
Sure.
right?
Sure, yeah, right.
So I don't think it would have any negative impact.
I don't think
on
so either. I
passive
just-
use of the property.
Gwen, anything?
Would that be available for town use as well, or like groups in town, or?
Well, that's how I
Scouts or-
foresee it being used, yes, but as are the grounds, that would be determined by the Board of Selectmen. But I don't envision it as just being used by the Council on Aging.
I would think it would become part of the community center.
Right.
Danny, anything?
No?
Dan?
Nope.
So, kind of summing up, we're kind of still with the $625,000 price tag, and we got maybe a better idea how it's going to be used. Does anyone have any other questions that they need more information on before we would make a decision?
No.
Not here.
Right, so why don't we say we'll take a vote on this, probably at next week's meeting. Let you know
Okay.
if it was one way or another,
All right?
all right?
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for your time and your effort, appreciate it.
Appreciate
you.
your time, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we do have a few more people that are supposed to be here, and I know Diane Phillips on the trails said she was gonna be late, so she'll probably be coming shortly. I think Mr. Haynes is here to help her.
You get stood up?
Oh, she said she was gonna be late, but we'll see. Are you here for Howard?
Howard Wilbur requested I attend to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think,
Not to be ignorant, but can you give me a scope of what his request is?
kind of indicated that he had developed it with you. But he do a mile of sidewalks along Union Street from Route 18. I don't know if I have his here somewhere.
I have the application. You want to look at that, John? This is, I think that's a copy of what everybody received, right? The application for Union Street work?
He has, at the last page of it, John, is a letter from you to Howard.
Is this what the request, the amount, the estimate that I had provided?
I think that's-
It appears to be 660.
Yeah, 660.
Yep.
Certainly not opposed to the idea.
Should we discuss it a little bit now?
Yeah,
without him
absolutely.
here?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
So he wants to do it mile, assume one side or the other. I don't know if he's already selected the right side as being going out or the left side of the road going out.
It would make sense, and, you know, there is existing sidewalk for a portion of Union Street as you come from the Bedford Street intersection. There is a portion of sidewalk that extends down to Hobart Street.
Yep.
So I believe this mile would essentially extend sidewalk down to the Burr Lane. That was the,
Right.
conceptually what we had once discussed. So this would extend sidewalk to that area, which would service a significant population. Because if you think about the number of homes, I think there are over 100 homes just in Broad Meadow, Burr Lane.
Right.
And it certainly would make, work towards our attempt to connect downtown, in that walking pedestrian area. It would be a significant improvement along that corridor. Again, I would agree with Howard's proposal that, obviously not only benefiting the residents of Union Street, it would be a benefit to the entire community because we are working to continue to connect pedestrian-friendly, walkability throughout the community. So whenever we have an opportunity to do that, I'm strongly in favor of it. And we have looked at a number of different, methodologies for, as far as, and actually the estimate that this is constructed off of is based on a grant we received just last year for Complete Streets program, and we became a Complete Streets community in 2020, and then subsequently we received a grant for $360,000 to add the other side of the sidewalk on Plymouth Street. So that was part of that. That was originally involved in the concept when we built the new high school. So the intent was, obviously, the high school is a significant pedestrian attraction, right?
Yep.
The reconstruction of the sidewalks and what developed into the reconstruction of Route 18 was all driven by the, construction of the high school, as well as we had originally proposed to have sidewalks on both sides of the corridor so that, students and just people utilizing the grounds of the school would have, you know, safe access on both sides. People are like, well, what, you already have one over there. Well, this essentially links all the way from the middle school to the high school, now to the community center, to the YMCA, out to we now have sidewalk that you can walk on all the way to Alive Latham Farm, which then ties into, through Alive Latham Farm, into Stonegate. So you now have pedestrian accommodations all the way to that area of Washington Street. And, you know, that's the intent, is that we can continue to construct segments of sidewalk to these different, particularly the more densely populated residential areas of, you know, town, and continue to build out these segments. So that, again, I'd be entirely supportive of and rationale. And I think it falls within the ARPA kind of, first of all, it's infrastructure related,
Yep.
which, you know, but also the intent, you know, get people outside, get them, you know, and we saw that, and continue to, I think. On your way home tonight, look at how many people are outside utilizing, you know, the sidewalks and the pedestrian ways. And, you know, unfortunately, Hobart Street is, from Hobart Street to Burr Lane on Union Street is a relatively narrow corridor.
Right.
So as a pedestrian who, you know, walks that fairly often, because we have a pretty wide walking loop we do with the dogs, I'm sure people see me out there wondering what I'm doing. It would be a great improvement. I think it would be utilized, you know, extensively. You know, and wouldn't be one of these sidewalks that is built, created that walks to nowhere. And
Question.
with the hope that we could then, you know, move right down to Christina Estates.
So as I drive down Union Street, I look, say, on the right side as I'm going away from Bedford Street, all the telephone poles and the trees that are right at the edge of the road, that's gotta have a huge impact on
Yes.
doing this.
So I think we'd, that first section of sidewalk with the large mature trees, a number of those large mature trees are a state of decline. So part of this would be, you know, obviously we'd have to remove those trees due to the impact on the roadway, as well as the trees themselves.
Yep.
But all of this is with the intent, you know, go back to my roots, no pun intended, you know, of essentially reforesting, you know, when we do this. And what we do is, so you'll actually take the same space, but right now you'll notice there's a bit of a grass strip in between the road and the actual sidewalk, and that's where these trees have grown. And as a result, as the trees reach maturity, they heave, they, you know, make the sidewalk relatively unsafe and rolls and such. And it's just not a great spot for a tree to grow. So what we do is take that, move the sidewalk to the curb with a raised granite curb, and you put your 5 feet of pedestrian sidewalk in, and then you plant trees on the backside of the sidewalk. So eventually, 40, 50, 60 years from now, you've put the right tree in the right place. It's where it should be. It's not a safety hazard. It's not a traffic hazard. You know, when you move that tree back away from the road, you're not worrying about, you know, hitting the tree as you travel. And it's a good place for the tree to grow. It's a win-win situation for all. Utility poles are a little bit different. Obviously, where we do have sections of poles, we try to, you know, face the back edge of the sidewalk in front of that. Still want to maintain the travel width on the roadway. If it gets to an area where that's not conducive, well, all of a sudden the residents on the other side of the road get lucky and they get a sidewalk over there and you put a crosswalk in. Because none of these projects, you know, scope the replacement of relocation of utilities. But the miles of sidewalk that I've now been able to put in town over the last decade or so, we've been able to address that pretty successfully. And maximize how far we can go with those dollars.
Anyone else with questions? Right, again, why don't we wait and go for next week? Maybe,
Thanks.
So you think that cost will cover it, John?
It'll be
If we,
close. We've seen significant escalations in our utility, in our infrastructure costs.
when do you think you could do it? Like, what would be the time frame?
We do it this year.
Oh, this year, okay.
You know, if we know, within the next few weeks, we've just renewed our contract with our sidewalk, so we have a sidewalk contract in place. That's one of the things we do. We anticipate funding for sidewalks from some place or another, so, as those funds become available, we already have an existing contract in place. We don't have to go out to bid.
Oh, good.
So we could notify them that we have this work, we get it in the queue, and, we can start that work, and again, I'd expect to see it done this year.
all right, well,
It's right in our bailiwick.
John, you
Stuff we
mentioned,
like to do.
you mentioned grants on something else too. Are there any matching funds available to combine with this? Do you know, of, or is that gonna hold it up?
It would certainly hold it up because the complete streets applications, we submit those in October,
Okay.
so we'd have to wait. And we've identified, this project is identified within so our complete streets is essentially, we reviewed the entire town, and we worked on this for over a year. And we identified different segments of the community where, when you look at a section of roadway, you look at it from a complete multimodal view, rather than simply getting cars up and down the street. You look at it from, vehicular, pedestrian, bicycle, all different accommodations, and try to figure out what you can, what that area can accommodate. Again, if you take a road like Union Street that's 24 feet wide, it's difficult to make that street, 40 feet with, 6-foot sidewalks and the curb space. So complete streets allows us to take that, do an analysis of it, and identify improvements that are reasonable. So we've done that throughout town, and it's all scored by a criteria rating. Again, that's why the sidewalk on Plymouth Street scored high, because of the heavy pedestrian, the utilization of that area for pedestrian traffic. There would also, another phase of that were the LED crosswalks that we've put in at all the school crossings. You'll notice along Route 106, that was part of that grant as well, upgrading the crosswalks, restriping, things like that.
okay, well,
It's the best dollars we can spend. People see them immediately.
Right.
thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thanks, John.
Don't go away. Diane, you're up.
Help you.
So welcome.
Thank you.
We want to talk about the trails, Sachem Rock and Bennett Lane and safety improvement plan.
Okay, so the last time I was here, I explained the project, and you had a couple questions, so I've sort of been on the search for the answers for that. And in talking to John, his concern was when we apply for a grant through the ARPA funds, does it need to be handicap accessible, is what we do. That was your question before. So in looking at, I downloaded a document about all the ARPA grants that are, and I believe this was ARPA 2.0. I don't know if that's the same one we're working on. But basically, towns that were doing, using it on their green space. So to me, it looks like that when the word improvement and repairs is in there, it's not a new construction site, so this is existing, so that making what we do handicap accessible would not be a necessary requirement. So that was what I found.
Certainly a significant consideration when we were discussing this project, because obviously,
The deal killer, I think.
and that was my concern.
Yeah.
And to know that, you know, when we look at it as an improvement or repair
Right.
is,
I think their words were designed improvements to restore or create walking routes to parks. So it's, I also tried to, I've been in touch with someone, but haven't gotten an answer yet. Someone who works with, I think it's recess or access maybe. So those questions are out there, but I think it's all on new construction. That was my understanding. And, I mean, when we look at the community gardens, that in itself was not handicap accessible, and that was a grant. So I think we're safe
Yep,
doing repairs,
it's good news.
Yep.
very good news.
yeah. So,
I think we asked a lot of our questions the last time, so I don't
Mhm.
need to go back through that unless somebody has something that's come to their mind.
Well, I just think that one of the things that you mentioned last time was talking about routes and stuff like that. Now, it seems like an awful lot of extra work. Would you just be filling in the paths with wood chips, or what's the scope of the project, I guess, you know,
Well, I think we need to get the bids and see what we can do for the money that we have. The bridges were really important because safety aspect, especially the ones down by Satram.
Hmm.
The bridges, if you're facing the community garden, the bridge to the left is it's unsafe to walk through, and the one straight out, those would be two priorities. I think we'd have to prioritize after we get our bids, and see, it might be a relocation. Sometimes it's easier to relocate versus than to repair, and that would be something we'd have to look at.
One of the things we discussed as well was the utilization of some structural soils in areas, structural gravels, rather than wood chips
Mm.
in some of these areas, because the wood chips deteriorate, they become mushy, they, you know, trip hazards and such, whereas we could use some permeable structural soils in those more, in the areas that are a little more challenging with the
Yeah.
roots and the slopes
Mm.
and things like that. And, you know, it's essentially, because it would be nice to try to make accessibility a part of whatever project goes on. And make it so that more people can utilize those trails and feel more comfortable out there walking, and address some of the, you know, the trip hazards and such, and
puddles.
puddles, and wood chips,
Yeah.
and to lend to puddles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, degrees of side slope and things like that, so when people get out there, they feel a little more sure-footed.
Mm. So we have a lot of clay out there, and it really compacts, it becomes very slippery when wet.
Mm.
And, it would be awesome to see.
They're nice hiking trails, and
Yes.
Oh,
we,
yeah.
maybe they could become more walking trails, I think.
Mm,
Right.
That's,
there's a sense.
Right.
yeah.
Right, and this was $75,000, right?
That's what we estimated. I have not gone to bid for anything because I haven't been given that go-ahead, so I think we would make do with that.
Okay,
Again, I think it could potentially be a combination project too, as well, where resources from Public Works and, you know,
Mm.
volunteers could work together to stretch those dollars to the extent, you know.
Yep.
There's a lot of different kind of creative ways we could maximize those dollars and how far we could make them go. So it
Mm.
wouldn't per se have to be a project that entirely was put out to public bid and prevailing wage, because we can utilize a lot of the internal resources we have, you know, even if it's, you know, us being able to procure materials through our, you know, contracted pricing, things like that, you know, assist with, you know, delivery and transport. Those are all places we can help save costs and extend.
Even local volunteers might be happy to
Yeah,
help.
yeah, I mean,
A lot of
Mm.
people use the trails, and a lot of groups that would probably,
right.
help
I
out.
like to say, you know,
Mhm.
DPW can help a lot of times with the heavy lifting,
right.
Mhm.
and then,
Mm.
you know, the local organizations can, they makes a good partnership.
sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything they wanna add, or?
I think it's a great asset. Be nice to keep it up.
Yeah, it fits well with the community gardens and the Sachem Center right there. I think it just, it's a win-win.
Yep.
I think it's nice to recognize too that all of that entire walking trail network was built and constructed with volunteer labor. That really didn't cost, to this point, hasn't cost the town a cent to construct it, and it's an invaluable, when you start to think about the benefit it provides to the community, the number of people that utilize that on a regular basis is amazing. So it's a relatively small investment for the town to make to continue to maintain that area.
A lot of Eagle projects over there as well.
Yeah.
Scouts,
Yeah.
cleaning trails, and Bennett Lane too, you know.
Bennett Lane, that has
We were
been,
down there last year, I think, with one of the scouts doing some work, so.
yeah. Well,
All right, so what we'll do is, again, we'll postpone the vote until next week, and then, let you know.
okay, thank you so much. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Appreciate your hard work and getting it.
Yeah, thanks.
Any others you want to say?
What's that?
Anything else? Get the seat
Might
warmed
go
up.
to-
Need some more roads, John, or something?
I'm ready. I'll take everything. I'll take all you got.
If we have extra, we'll let you know.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Okay, so being 6:32, I'm assuming the rest of the people that we postponed from last week and the week before to this week are gonna be rescheduled for next week. Anybody have anything else they wanna bring up? To discuss tonight?
I just mentioned to you in an email about the pickup truck. I wanted to mention to everybody else what I had suggested on a pickup truck for the schools. Um,
Just now, you mean today?
What's that?
You mean today?
No. When I told you I couldn't make last week's
Yeah.
meeting, I had a couple of thoughts on the request for the pickup truck, and I don't know if anybody else has thought about this, is we should be able to quantify how many miles the pickup trucks, private vehicles are used for the schools. And I feel like we should know, we should be able to look at the number of miles that they're driving on a yearly basis to justify the $35,000 to $40,000 pickup truck.
Right.
And it just, I estimate if you went to Lowe's back and forth every day of the school year, it's what, 10 miles round trip? That's 1,800 miles. Okay, it seems like an awful lot of money to spend for something like that. So I just, I mentioned it to John when I told him I couldn't make it last week. And,
Right, and I think you mentioned the school probably has records of reimbursing the people for the mileage.
yes, they
That
should,
would
I
give
would
us a
think.
definite number of,
Well, there you go, right? What's the payback on that? How much we reimbursing, and how much is the truck gonna cost, and
Right.
how many years before it?
Just something to analyze, just to compare when we're looking at giving those funds. I mean, obviously, the funds are there, so, we're not gonna use them. That would be a final thing, but can we justify that amount of money for that many miles?
all right, so we need to reach out to Mr. Shea and find out if he can get that number. Right. Can you get in touch with him, Dan?
I
Your secretary?
email him all the time.
All right. You understand what we're asking for,
Yep.
all right?
I'll email him tonight because he's on vacation next week.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
John, I had another question. I had a follow-up email after Katie's trucking came in
Yes.
about whether they've already received PPE funds. So how do we get that answer?
I think they answered to,
Did they answer? Melanie?
Melanie, yes.
They did.
They didn't take any
They
money.
did not. I figured if they were asking, but, okay.
Good question, I'm glad you brought it up.
And on this pavilion that we talked about tonight, I'm still hung up on the amount of money they're asking for. It seems like a real high, I don't know, if they have numbers to justify the 625,000, but it just seems real high.
So when you looked and found some stuff, some comparable stuff online, what would the cost of these
You know, and I don't wanna downplay, you know, what Brian, is that his name?
Right.
Yeah.
Brian is gonna look at how he has to do things. But I just, you know, did a real quick Amish country search. And you can get a 40 by 60 shed roof for, you know, 100,000 or less. You know, and even if you threw in 50 for site work and another 50 for access and electricity and everything else, you're still only talking 200,000. I just thought that 625 was really excessive.
Well, it's like anything with the municipalities, you know?
I know, see,
First, I wanna get an architect, you know?
Yep.
Pay him 75,000. Then it's gonna cost labor, which is gonna be 3 times what you're thinking. It's gonna be 300 grand, when it should be 100 grand in the private sector,
Yeah.
you know? And then electrical, same thing, it's gonna be inflated because of that,
Prevailing wage.
you know? And then same with the foundation's a big money for that that big of a foundation.
But do you think the 625 is?
Seems high to me, but
Yeah.
I can see where it's going. I mean, you know, I don't know if they plan on using an architect, but I would say Pavilion probably wouldn't need it. It's just basically a roof with some poles, right? But typically, that's what they do because they want to fit in with the existing building, so,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's,
When they made,
It's a worthwhile project.
when they made the comparison to commercial club, you know, it's not just a roof and 2x4s.
Right,
It's-
right,
right.
It's
Right.
gotta be pretty solid.
oh, yeah,
You're
yeah,
having a community
absolutely.
there, yeah.
Yeah, it's
So-
gonna be well-built, right.
Yeah.
Structural.
Yeah,
So
I don't
they're-
dispute that.
Yeah.
Right, they are putting the storage in it, which would be similar like the commercial club does, like a bar or down one end, that's where they store
The
everything in
chairs
there.
and all that, yeah. Yeah,
Probably wanna buy chairs or whatever they're gonna use.
yeah, that's true, and then furniture, you know.
Yeah, I mean, there's added costs. I realize that electricity and getting, you know, the labor to install it, that's,
Well,
there's
you know, we've
costs there.
We've had these discussions at capital planning, you know, Dan knows, you know, every time they come up with a building, right, we're always shocked at how much.
How much it costs.
You know what I mean, they have estimates, I mean, they have the whole bid, and you're like, wow, you know what I mean? And then, of course, the other members are like, oh, I could build that for half that, or a third of that, they do the buildings, you know?
Yeah.
And they were all like horrified, but that's just that's the way it is, it's all union and prevailing wage, and, you know,
My experience is not municipal.
right, right.
Folks.
It is a different animal,
You know,
for sure.
and I fully understand that, you know, as I said, if I needed something, I get 3 prices on it and,
Right,
you know, go with the one I felt was best.
there's
Right.
competition and things like that, you know? So,
I mean, I'm trying to think of maybe a town around here that's done a similar building in the last
Yeah.
3
How
or
old
4
is the
years.
commercial club shed?
It's probably back
So you can't really
40 years ago or
compare,
something.
I don't think, you know, it was probably built in the 50s.
Yeah, probably.
60s.
My volunteers.
The volunteers, some
Yep.
beer.
Yeah, from beer and hot dogs.
You're right.
Narragansett,
Barn raising.
Black Label. All right, so think about it for next week, and we'll stick with our thing. We're gonna get back to our thing. We'll vote on them the following week.
Yeah, and even, you know, like with my questioning on the finances, that's not our call. It's a selectman's call.
Right.
Right.
So, you know, is a project a worthwhile project? You decide how much you're gonna spend.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, but we're making the recommendation to them,
Yeah.
so, I mean, if we wanna recommend it, we should, as a group, believe that this is a good thing.
Right.
And the money in there is the money that's in there, and I, you know, unfortunately, I assume if the money's in there, someone's gonna spend it.
Right.
Right, there's not gonna
Right.
be any left over, just like at the end of the 2 or 3 years, whatever it is that we have left, any ARPA money that's left will be spent by the town of East Bridgewater one way or another.
Right.
Correct, Charlie?
It's gonna be interesting to see what happens in the sense of, I'm not sure that we need to return to the feds, that's gonna be the problem. If we haven't spent down all the Plymouth County money, obviously it's Plymouth and that's their worry. The money that we have, we need to allocate it by December 2024. So I think, let's say June of 2024, we don't have or indications that one or more of the projects with Board of Selectmen's funded is not gonna come to fruition during the next, I think it's December 26th. I mean, it's hard to say that, because then you're talking 2.5 years out, but the final allocation needs to be done by December 24th. This assumes that Congress doesn't claw back anything in the meantime. I don't think it's likely right now, but a different administration in 25 might do something different. So it's probably, for our purposes, we want to be able to allocate and spend down as much of that money as possible before January of 2025.
Still got a couple of years almost.
And, you know, in light of that too, I think you mentioned this a couple of meetings ago, Charlie, if we recommend X amount of projects, you said something to the effect of prioritizing.
Yes.
And could we also add qualifications? Like, you know, like with the spending, you know, like first, you know, like if we prioritize something, for instance, like this pavilion for 625, that wipes out half of one of our, you know, so do we have other things in front of it and the balance left over for that 625? Do you know what I'm trying to get at? It's like, you know, so we prioritize and we utilize the funds according to that priority, whether one is big or little request.
Well, I think we went through that prioritization exercise in the beginning when we got the requests in, right?
But I think there's a sense in the committee that we may want to relook that, and maybe, now that we know a little bit more about what we're doing, the way we prioritize things may have been a little bit off. I mean, I think it was a good thing to do, and I don't think we should just throw it all out, but, I mean, you know, it wouldn't hurt us to take a look at it. But I think, on the other hand, as far as the money goes, I think right now, we don't have requests for all of the money that we have,
Right.
Okay.
right? So, it's not a matter of, if we do the 625, that means we can't buy the school pickup truck. So, I mean, we're not in that position yet, but at the
Is
same time.
there any appetite to open it up again and get more?
Well, the thing is, I think, my sense was that we would want to go through and get everything to the selectmen
First,
and then see what falls out.
yeah.
And if there's money left over, I think Charlie mentioned this last week, we could open up for new applications when we're at that point.
Right.
But, you know, right now, we're still, you know, we got a bunch of things, a number of things already recommended.
Right.
We have a number of things still left to decide on, but we're getting closer to the end. I think, you know, once we get to the end, where we've recommended everything, then it's up to the Board of Selectmen to get things done. And again, they're kind of feeling some pressure now, I think, because, you know, we're coming up to town meeting, and there are things like the capital committee, stuff that we know that's on both ARPA and capital committee requests. You know, is there a push to get some of that stuff approved by the Board of Selectmen versus recommended by us before, so that the town meeting has a better idea how much money they have left to spend.
Is the selectman aware of everything, all the applications?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, they got the full list, yes.
So is there a possibility that we have X amount of dollars, and we have, out of the 27, we approve 20, say, and in the last 7 are low priorities? Would they open it up to others if we don't use all
They
that
could.
money?
They could.
They could.
They haven't talked about doing that.
Yeah, I'm just, you know, curious, because I'm sure there are other worthy projects out there that might be, to us, a higher priority if we knew about them.
Right.
But is that the process? Again, I'm learning as I go along.
I can honestly say, no one has reached out to me to say, geez, I wish I had gotten in there.
Right.
Yeah.
We've had a couple.
Have you? I guess I'm not high on the phone.
But
That's all right with me. That's all right. Don't change it.
Careful, careful what you wish for.
Don't change it.
But I think we also had a process, and there was a deadline established, and the town did a great job about publicizing it, and if people didn't meet the deadline, you know, we're just dealing with what we have in front of us.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Right, it's their own fault.
And we see it, 800 from the turf, right?
Right.
That was factored into the overall budget, right?
Yeah.
Charlie, the people that have reached out, are we tracking that? Are we,
No,
no?
I mean, we would do the publicity again.
Just open it
And
up.
wouldn't, it wouldn't be, you got 3 days or something, it would be more like a month.
Right.
I don't even think it would be right to track them and then, say,
Right.
okay, well, Ken and Gigi and Glenn, you should put your application in
Right.
and then open it up
Right.
to everybody else when you guys already have the inside track. And it's gotta be kinda, like,
Play
the
fair.
last one was done on such and such a date, the announcement went out through the various channels. And anything else? Danny, how are the kids?
They're doing great. Excellent.
How's mom and dad doing?
Tired. But they're good. They're doing about 3-4 hours of sleep each night so far at a time.
Yeah.
So,
At the same time?
at the same time, yeah, we're trying to
Wow.
get them on the same schedule. Start them early. So, yeah, no, they're very good. It's either, if they're awake, it's either because they're hungry or need a diaper change, and they're
Right
right
back
back
up.
down. Right
There you go. That's
So
not so bad.
neither of those involve you, does it?
Both of them.
Like that.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, I'll sleep tonight. You can wake up at 4 a.m. No, I'm gonna need, you need to come too. There's 2 of them. Yeah, get 2 arms. Doesn't go over well.
You can't call
I'll
in
get them
sick.
tomorrow night. Yeah, no, doesn't go over well when I recommended that.
It'll be fun.
Yeah.
It probably is fun anyway.
Yeah,
So far, so good.
yeah, that's great.
All right, any last thoughts before we entertain a motion?
To adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Glenn, second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous.